so much about this hiring feels different than the past Chicago Bears coaching failures.
The Indianapolis Colts have their new defensive coordinator in Lou Anarumo.
Wisconsin already had plenty to say about Xavier Lucas transferring to Miami.
The largest comeback in team history.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
They did it. Ohio State won the national championship.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Man, this run, the 12-team playoff, it ended with an Ohio State 34-23 win over Notre Dame down in Atlanta. This team was one that had different roller coasters, different rides throughout the season. But at the end of the day, Ohio State finished the gauntlet. We had one of the wildest runs we've ever seen in college football and won the national championship. Jeff, we have seen a lot of Buckeye football. We've seen a lot of Buckeye national championships. Jeff Hunt, we've never seen a championship run like this ever in the sport.
Well, yeah, I will admit there's never been one, but I will say that Ohio State tends to show up when there's a new format. Like, the more difficult they make it, twice they've showed up the first run of it and won it. It's really amazing. I mean, in all honesty, though, just as a college football fan, like, and nobody will argue with it, it's one of the greatest runs we've ever seen, just because of, the Texas game was close and still 14-point victory. This game was not as close as it, seemed. There's a lot of good things to say about Notre Dame. I know they don't want to hear it right now. A ton of good things to say about Notre Dame, but between that and the first two blowouts, none of it makes sense. I don't remember teams really didn't have a second chance to come together and erase, some mistakes like Ohio State was afforded with the 12-team playoff, and good for them for taking advantage of it. And boy, oh boy, you want to talk about guys showing up. You want to talk about a coach that learned how to coach overnight. I mean, I think we can all just unbelievable in-game. Both these in-game coaches were really good. I was worried about. And to top it off, man, it's hard to explain to a couple young guys like you, but to have your 2.5-year-old grandson call you and tell you go Bucks in his first national championship, it's just an unbelievable night here in Ohio. It's crazy. Cannot say enough good things about this team. And I apologize to all of them because I've said a lot of bad things about them.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of football too.
I've seen my fair share. Are we still firing Ryan Day after this game? Is that what happens?
Right off into the subs. That's how he handles the pressers.
Yeah. Is this his riding off into the sunset moment of, all right, you don't want me here. Bye, guys. You're welcome for that national championship, but hope you enjoy it. Sorry, I lost to Michigan.
I think there's a chance.
I was having a debate with a friend earlier tonight about whether you'd rather lose to your rival and win the national championship or not win the national title and beat your rival. Like, this is not a close. This should not be close. You guys know I'm an Oregon guy. If the one loss Oregon had all season, no matter how good or bad they were, was to Washington, but they won the national title, I would not care in the slightest. Would not care. Wouldn't care.
Can I tell you, Spencer, you're right. I can tell you without 100% without a doubt, you are correct, sir.
Yeah, it's just crazy how this all unfolded, and it's the second time that in the first year of the newly expanded playoff, Ohio State says, "Thank you very much for opening the door. We will gladly walk right through it." And I thought Josh Payton made a lot of good points about this over the last few weeks when talking about the expanded playoff and his opposition to it. Is you're not opening the door in a 12-team playoff for a Cinderella that was getting left out before. You were opening the door for this right here. So all of you that wanted it, here you go. This is what you get. This is what it does. If you think that makes college football better, great. That's the situation we have now. We know they're not going backwards. They're going to go forwards with more playoff expansion eventually. I guarantee you within the next 15 to 20 years, we will see a 24-team college football playoff because people will start pointing out, well, the FCS has a 24-team playoff. What? Why is it only 16 up here? Like that's never going to end. But for Ohio State, the good news about that is you have no ability to question this run or try and cast dispersions or doubts about it. There is nothing that you can say, nothing that you can hold. Michigan, you beat Ohio State. Congratulations. You didn't win a national championship. You didn't do that you did that last year. That was your moment, but Ohio State's got the moment now. But when you blast Tennessee, you beat the number 1 overall team who beat you earlier in the season in a close game, and you beat them soundly, and then you beat Texas despite making a mistake, and then you have the big lead on Notre Dame. You faced a different variety of teams. You faced high caliber teams and showed why they were the best team on paper coming into this year. And what do you know? They're the best team at the end of the year. Are we doing away with preseason polls too? Because I think Ohio State was the preseason, number 3, 4? What were they?
Somewhere around there. Somewhere top 5.
Yeah, somewhere around there. But preseason polls don't ever give us an accurate depiction of who's good, right? All right, I'm done for now.
Can I ask Spencer a question real quick?
You
Jay?
may.
This because, and I swear this isn't a needle. This is a real question. Like, I thought one of the huge flaws in this playoff was exactly what happened to Oregon. They got punished for being really good, and what the team behind them losing a terrible game, and then all of a sudden, they get matched up in the first game with an Ohio State. Like, there was no reward for the conference champions. I would say all that. I mean, all the teams that had a bye lost. Like, what is I know as an Oregon fan, you've had to have thought of what is the fix to reward the good teams rather than they all got punished.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways you can go about that. You either reseed after the first round, or do not just give the first round buys automatically to a conference champion, right? If you want to have the 5 highest ranked conference champions into the playoff, I have no objection to that, because that does provide some increased importance in those games for a Clemson to get in, or Boise State had to beat UNLV to get it. Like, I have no problem with that, because I'm a regular season purist kind of guy, and I've always viewed conference championship games as an extension of the regular season. So if you want to do that, that's fine. But when you look at the field, the point was, hey, we want to maximize the importance of these conference championship games, and yet I don't think there's a single Oregon fan out there, myself included, and I've reversed my take on it, knowing what I know now. There's not a single Oregon fan who I think would say, yeah, I'm glad we won the Big Ten championship game. Like, should have lost.
I totally
take
agree.
the home game against SMU or Clemson or whoever. You would have had a shorter layoff, and then you'd be playing a home game first. If Ohio State couldn't go into Autzen Stadium and win, I don't think anybody else would have. And then at the very least, you're into the quarterfinal, but you haven't been sitting around for a few weeks. And I think that is the unfortunate part of the whole format here. But again, I'm just not surprised by any of this. When they said, oh, we're going to expand the playoff, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure you guys will get it right, because you've gotten everything else right my entire life. But again, for Ohio State, this is not me trying to take away from what they did, because they were really impressive. Frankly, I don't know. Even if Oregon loses the Big Ten championship game, wins 3 playoff games, and is in the spot where Notre Dame is, I don't know that they're beating Ohio State there either. Like, Oregon was an incredibly good, really talented team, lest we forget they won the Big Ten and did not lose a game until the Rose Bowl. They were really, really good. And I still think when Ohio State was at their best, they were better. They were just better across the board. So yes, the format needs to be fixed, but the first concern for Oregon fans after this is, Oregon's got to be better in those spots. Arizona State got down early. They were able to make a comeback, and Oregon was not.
Now, I'm glad you actually talked about the situation where Oregon wasn't better in certain situations. Arizona State came back, because in this game tonight, Notre Dame fought back. They kept fighting. And we all knew that at some point, Notre Dame might find a way to claw back. Ohio State allowed them to. Ohio State made some mistakes on defense. There were some issues offensively where they weren't scoring as consistently as you would like to later in the game. and they still had enough at the end of the day to get the job done. We saw it against Texas, where we talked about it last week, guys. They had numerous drives where they made boneheaded decision after boneheaded decision. It seemed like tonight IGB went back to the old IGB, where he's just holding and he has stickum on his hands and he's attached to the closest jersey, which is a Notre Dame guy. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, what are you doing? The one thing you don't want to do is get a penalty, a holding penalty or pass interference.
Yeah.
You let them stay in the game. But Ohio State still had a gear that Notre Dame didn't stop. The fact that Jeremiah Smith only had one catch in the second half and Ohio State won
Pretty big catch.
Oh, I was gonna say, wait.
Huge catch.
The fact that
huge
Jeremiah Smith only had the biggest catch in I'll say biggest reception in Ohio State football history. You're right. Maybe outside of the wide receiver throwback against Alabama. That's probably the biggest touchdown ever.
I'm saving that for later because I got a comment about that very throw, Jeff. But Ohio State had a gear that when Texas couldn't
Ohio
get
State
past
was
Notre Dame
better
couldn't
than
get
Notre
past
Dame.
it.
Ohio State was better
Spencer
than Notre
tweeted
Dame.
it out. Ohio State was better, but Ohio State's gear that they had this year is what Oregon's trying to get next year. It's what Texas is trying to get. These top teams are trying to get the gear that Ohio State has that no one else has, and it showed up tonight.
And let me give credit to Ohio State, and this is what that gear was, and it's not more complicated than this. They had a bunch of guys that stayed. That's it.
Yes.
If Oregon or Texas or whoever, all their players stay for a fourth year, they're going to look exactly the same. That was what the gear was. The gear was when Jack Sawyer and JTT and all these guys decided to stay. That's the gear. It's physicality, it's mental toughness, it's being through what they've been through. This game tonight could not happen without the Georgia game a couple years ago. Like none of this could happen. These guys have been drugged through it. And I mean, at some point, I know we're going to get to the Will Howard discussion, how he played. And I really believe played one of the great college football championship games of all time, as far as decision-making. And I mean, the throw, I mean, it's the confidence of the coach, the play calling. I mean, I don't even know where to start. Chip Kelly, I thought, called a really good game. I know he got tight towards the end, but when it was time to call it, it was called and it was, executed. And I mean, let's be fair about this Ohio State team. They scored on almost every drive they had. You can't really play.
They punted once.
You can't really play offense much better than they did. There's one fumble. And
if they don't fumble, they're going to score again.
If Ibuka doesn't fumble, like that's not even a conversation, but he did. And thank goodness for that kid who put his heart and soul into this team. We love him. So many of these guys are, everybody can laugh or whatever, but I'm the Ohio guy. These guys are legendary, like Buckeyes, in our heart forever, stamped. This is a really special team. What's funny is the 14 team was the youngsters. That was a sophomore team. That was a sophomore-driven team. Came out of nowhere, had all this talent, had the greatest.
Thanks. That makes me feel great.
One of the biggest.
I didn't know that. I could have gone my entire life and died not knowing that. It would have been fine.
Was that 42-20?
Zeke
that was
42-20.
The game was closer than that, but yeah.
All the guys came back were just juniors, and then they left and had that draft class that set the record for draft class and all that. This team was the opposite. These are a bunch of guys who we were disappointed in. Here's the thing about this team. They don't have a Big Ten championship, and they don't have a Michigan victory, and they've got the greatest national championship on record. It's the weirdest thing that has ever happened. I mean, I told Jay before the show, Spencer, Ohio State basically wiped out 4 years of what we're going to just say disappointment.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good way to do it,
I can't, there's no way to describe the euphoria.
What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, the first it's got to be different than winning the first one, though. Like the first national championship you ever saw for Ohio State. That one hits differently, right?
02 was pretty awesome.
02, that was there's a play in that one I'm going to tie into later on.
And they're all three different.
I remember 02. Pre-K was wild, man.
BCS, then 14 playoff, then 12 team. All three different national championships. It's just.
Plus, there were a bunch under Woody Hayes when they just named national champions.
I was getting ready to say when everybody got one.
Yeah, so all four. Okay, well, not everybody again, but I think for Ohio State, like there, was some discussion flying around online about how much money they spend on the roster and living and doing all this sort of stuff. But just because you have all of that talent does not mean that you're automatically just going to win. You know who has the biggest athletic department budget of anybody in the country every year for the last, I think, 10 to 15 years? Texas. Mm-hmm. Texas spends more money on athletics or has more revenue or is at least in the top 5 every single year. It doesn't guarantee any of that. And so if anyone out there wants to write off the coaching job that Ryan Day just did and Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles as well, they just have more talent. Well, they have a lot of talent. That's incredibly clear. These guys are so well coached. So well coached. What was the biggest thing that got in Ohio State's way in this game and in the Texas game? The penalties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was so mind-numbingly annoying, I assume, for Ohio State fans, because that's not something that they did very often. They were, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, one of the least penalized teams in all of college football this year. And throughout the playoff, that's the only thing that got in their way. Like this team was able to maximize its talent in a way that past all-time rosters haven't, that Texas A&M was never able to, despite recruiting at this same sort of level. Like this is what happens when you blend high-end roster acquisition and recruiting with high-end coaching. That's what it looks like. They're just better. And the only way other teams were able to beat them was, for the most part, Ohio State getting in their own way. I think Oregon just beat them in Eugene, but Michigan or Texas, the Texas game being close was all about the Ohio State mistakes. It was all about that. And in this game, Ohio State gets up, and then all of a sudden, you've got a fumble. It's a great play by the defender, but that's a veteran receiver who should probably know, I don't need an extra 2 yards. I can just go down right here in this spot. And then Notre Dame started moving the ball. What happened? Up, couple penalties here and there to extend the drive, leads to a touchdown. That was the only way anyone really hung around with them in the playoff. They were well coached, well prepared, and incredibly talented.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of the most fun evenings this year was me and my wife getting a chance to go out. The excitement, the energy, it's unforgettable. It's unmistakable. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Notre Dame loses a heartbreaker, 34-23. They nearly pulled the comeback off. A lot of stuff to get to with this game tonight. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So obviously, we got Kenton Gibbs here of Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On ACC, Brian Smith of Locked On Knowles here with us, and I'm Joe George of Locked On Sports Chicago. So as the Notre Dame fan on the show today, I am obviously disappointed with the end. Appreciate the effort that Notre Dame put in for sure, trying to make this into a game and making it a game. Couple decisions that obviously we'll talk about, the field goal, the fake punt. I'm glad this game did not end the way it was looking like it was going, to be honest. I hate to do like anything that sounds like a moral victory, but compared to what we've seen in the past in my lifetime in Notre Dame and national championship games, it's been a disaster most of the time. So definitely a tough one for Irish fans today. Brian, I'll go to you first. I'm curious your overall reactions as you watch this game play out from a 9-minute and 45-second drive and 18 plays to where it ended.
Well, the opening drive, we expected Riley Leonard to get the ball. I didn't know about 8-9 times. And you could tell he was sick when they said, well, he's puking on the sidelines. And I immediately said, uh-oh. and then they changed their defense a little bit, and Notre Dame didn't have an answer for it, at least not initially. And then more importantly, Notre Dame's cover one defense, you can't run that against Ohio State. Nobody does. Even Texas didn't either. They weren't in sorts, and when you're missing 3 out of your top 5 defensive linemen, you can't give up over 5 yards tote. Kenton, you're a defensive lineman by trade. When you knew they were going in with that in a cover 2, I'm sure the defensive linemen weren't thrilled about it because that extra hat in the box, especially when it's Xavier Watts a lot of the time. That's a tough pill to swallow, but they just weren't going to let Jeremiah beat him, which they did a really good job of. And I know he got to play at the end, but at that point you had to just try cover 1. It didn't work. But were you surprised by Notre Dame running cover 2 there most of the game, or what'd you think about it?
I mean, if you're asking me, cover 2 was what I expected all day because everybody kept talking about Michigan gave you the blueprint. Michigan gave you the blueprint. What did Michigan do? They had 2 first-rounders on the inside, and they could say, hey, you know what? We can stop the run with about 6. If we can stop the run with 6, we can leave everybody else in coverage and make it happen. The problem is, like Brian said, the injuries finally caught up. And I promise you, the reality of this game is when you look at this was not an overmatch. This was not an overpowered. This was not a Freeman got out coach. This was literally just that. You look at the margins where Ohio State won this game, and by and large, you could directly point to, if this player is healthy, that play might not happen. If this player is healthy, they may be in the third and a little bit longer. So, I believe they were, 9 for 12 on third down? You know what leads to success on third down? First down success. When you put yourself in third and shorter situations, that leads to it. And even beyond that, another thing that leads to having some good success on third down, if you don't have great pass rushers available, if you don't have guys that can push the pocket and all that stuff available, because the interior pass rushers left some wide open lanes for Will Howard to get through. And of course, he's a Division I quarterback. He's going to do it. He's going to do what works there. So, some people would say that this was a matchup of Chip Kelly and Al Golden, and Al Golden was taken advantage of. But I look at it like this. If the roles were reversed and you give Chip Kelly as shorthanded of an offense as Al Golden had of a defense, do you think this game ends up the same way? I'd say a resounding no.
Yeah, I definitely think the injuries at this point, it always felt like the injuries were going to catch up to Notre Dame at some point. Like, you're missing first-round picks. You're missing guys that are elite defenders all over the place in every level of your defense. It definitely felt like, or especially in the first half, like when Ohio State's pulling away from this thing and you're seeing, the running backs, whether it's, Henderson, Junkins, whoever, are not getting touched until they get to the linebackers, kind of performed with a lot of bad tackling, it looked like, in the first half, just a lot of missed tackles. It really did feel like the injuries are ultimately what cost the Irish in this game, which is unfortunate. But also, I also think it's like part of our reality now. Don't you guys think that, like, with this expanded playoff, that it feels like every year there's going to be major players missing with all these extra games these teams are going to be playing, and I feel like a lot of times, kind of looking into the future for Notre Dame and other teams, the injuries are going to be something that are going to be a huge storyline for a lot of the playoffs going forward.
Oh, absolutely. That's the logical conclusion of this thing. We know more plays, more games, more banging, more clanging, more wear and tear. That's ultimately always going to be a factor in this thing. Health, this is one of the last gladiator sports. Health is always going to be a very important factor in a gladiator sport. But again, I acknowledge more than anything else, when this game looked truly out of hand, when it got to 31-7, I said, they're going to roll up. They're going to roll up. This game is over. But for them to still come back and still have a fight and still make this game respectable toward the end. And again, I know Irish fans don't want to hear this. I get it, right? That Golden Dome, it doesn't say play like a runner-up today. That's not what the sign says, when they slapping it going to it. It says play like a champion today. I get it. I'm not saying that Notre Dame fans don't have a right to be upset here. What I am going to say is this team put together a hell of a season. And like you said, at some point in time, you can say next man up all you want. But the difference between your first and your third guy exists for a reason. The difference between those things exists for a reason. And you can say all day and night, it was the scheme, it was the this, it was the that. Brian Smith is a guy that works in recruiting a lot. And you know what the saying is in recruiting, because it's a truism. It's not about your X's and your O's. It's about your what, Brian?
Jimmys and your Joes.
And when you got your first two Jimmys down and Joe is in the tent being evaluated and Riley's on the sideline throwing up, you're going to have a bad time.
Go ahead, Brian.
Notre Dame had, 4 or 5 guys moved around on the offensive line, depending on the game throughout the year. And they played okay tonight. But, I mean, Jeremiah Love, they tried to say he was healthy before the game. I'm like, he's got an MCL or whatever that he's nursed. Get the heck out of here. There's no way he's going to be healthy in spring ball, let alone in the national title game. He'll get about 6 reps in spring. You know what I mean? Like, it just is what it is. You can't have your best players out all over the place. Benjamin Morrison out, etc. And it just cost them. I thought that the actual game plan, just as an example from Al Golden to Kenton's point, was what you had to do. And I know nobody wants to hear that. You are not running cover 1 against Ohio State if Ben played. Without him, you are definitely not running it. And then you got to give credit to Chip Kelly. They ran Howard and basically used him in the exact same manner that Notre Dame did with Riley Leonard. There is no way around it. You have an extra hat to block. It's just generic math. And he's a dude. He's 235, 240 pounds. He's not fun to tackle, and Notre Dame didn't have an answer for that. So they got run over without like Ken was talking about Michigan. Their game plan's better because they have 2 guys up front that Notre Dame doesn't have, like Girth, because Riley Mills isn't in there because of the injury. And Howard Cross, while he's good, he's banged up, and he's not a big guy for the position. He's a quick, just make guys miss. It's not the same. So Ohio State did a good job on those short yardage and killed Notre Dame in that.
And just a quick thing before we go back to you, Joe. To speak about the scheme for a second, when you think about going cover 1, right? What does cover 1 leave you susceptible to? And what happened every time Notre Dame went cover 1, even when they had great coverage? Man coverage leaves you susceptible to the quarterback run. It's a pick your poison. And tonight, Ohio State was wheeling and dealing the best cyanide I've seen in some time. So you look at this thing, and again, it's not a situation where I would say, hey, I know for a fact if everybody's healthy, Notre Dame wins this game. I'm not going to tell that lie. But what I will say is this. Looking at this game, even solely, isolating from everything else, just saying, just tonight, what did we see? We saw an Ohio State team that had better Jimmys and Joes. Much more than the scheme was just, they were throwing up to wide open guys all night and the running lanes where you could drive a Mack truck through them. That wasn't the case. They just had guys. I remember there was one play when they were driving to go up 21-7. Travion Henderson gets hit at about the 20 or 15, and he falls forward to the 8. Like, that's the type of stuff where it's like, as a coach, what do you want them to do? Their safety is coming down and trying to make a tackle, and this guy's still getting 7 yards after contact. So, again, this is one of those moments where I'm looking up and I'm saying, you got beat by a better team. But again, this was not an all-out domination to the point where it's like, this is going to be a black eye on Notre Dame's history forever. And to say that it is, look at the last couple of times you played in the national championship or a game like this. It was nowhere near like this.
So much about this hiring feels different than the past Chicago Bears coaching failures.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast.
And I think we're all looking around today, pinching ourselves a little bit, and maybe in a little bit of disbelief that the Bears actually got their guy, got the top guy in the coaching search, because that's the first thing that feels distinctly different here than previous Bears head coaching searches. Ben Johnson is the candidate that seemingly every other team wanted, or at least most other teams wanted. The Las Vegas Raiders and Tom Brady were hot on Ben Johnson and trying to do everything in their power to bring him into the Sin City. The Jacksonville Jaguars were going hard after Ben Johnson and really wanted to pair him with Trevor Lawrence. I think some of the other teams in the head coaching search got the impression that they weren't as high on Ben Johnson's list, so maybe they kind of backed out a little bit. But you ask around the NFL and around fan bases, this was the consensus top guy. Most fans of most teams who have a head coaching opening wanted their team to hire Ben Johnson. And the Bears don't usually land that guy. When you think back to previous Bears head coaching searches, you can even just look right at Matt Eberflus or even, Mark Trestman and stuff before that. Like, the Bears hire a coach. Usually it's a guy that, okay, he was a pretty good assistant coach or something, and there's a few things to like, and maybe he'll be a good coach. But, he's not like some out-of-this-world candidate. It's kind of a second or third choice type of vibe is usually what the Bears get. Not with Ben Johnson. They pulled him away from the Raiders. They pulled him away from the Jaguars. They got the coach that everybody else wanted. And I know some people will point to, when the Bears hired Matt Nagy, he was a pretty hot coaching candidate, having worked with Patrick Mahomes and under Andy Reid. But even Matt Nagy came with a lot of question marks about his offense too, having not been the play caller in Kansas City. That was part of the, I guess, the downside or the risk with the hiring of Matt Nagy at the time that gave some people pause. Not that Ben Johnson doesn't have any questions or downside or risk or whatever, but I think there's a lot fewer question marks about what Ben Johnson does on offense than what Matt Nagy does on offense. Both coaches carry some questions about how good of a head coach will there be. We've seen Ben Johnson be a great offensive coordinator. We've never seen Ben Johnson be a head coach. So that doesn't mean, just because he was a great offensive coordinator, doesn't mean he'll be a great head coach. But we didn't know how great of an offensive coordinator Matt Nagy was. We just knew he was underneath Andy Reid. And so I think while Ben Johnson's green flags can give you a lot of confidence and faith in him as a head coaching hire, it does not guarantee he's going to be a great head coaching hire. But I do think it protects us in a way where Bears fans are never going to be able to look back some years in the future and say, oh man, the Bears really should have hired this other candidate, that we should have known at the time that the Bears got the wrong guy. Maybe sometimes with previous Bears head coaching hires, they hire somebody and like, ooh, that wasn't really who I wanted or who you thought they should want, and there was this other candidate that would have been so much better. That doesn't exist right now. Ben Johnson is it. You won't look back and have the Mark Trestman, Bruce Arians debate about, oh, if only they had hired that other guy. A lot of people wanted them to hire that other guy, but they didn't hire the guy everybody wanted. This time, they hired the guy that everybody wanted, and we just haven't seen that happen much at all in recent Chicago Bears history. That gives me so much more confidence in saying, I don't know if it's going to work, but this is their best shot toward being able to make it work. There's something to be said about the wisdom of the crowd here and being the team that everyone else wanted to be in this coaching cycle. The other green flag that jumps out at me outside of Chicago here is if you look at the reaction of especially Green Bay Packers fans, but also Minnesota Vikings fans and Detroit Lions fans. This is the coach Packers fans did not want the Chicago Bears to hire. This is the coach Minnesota Vikings fans did not want the Chicago Bears to hire. And certainly the Detroit Lions didn't want Ben Johnson staying within the division. Usually when your enemies, quote unquote, aren't a fan of a move that you make, it's usually a good sign that you probably made a good move, or at least made a smart process decision, right? Again, doesn't guarantee results, but it's the decision that everyone was afraid that you would do because they don't want you to do good things. The people who don't want you to do good things think you did something good here, right? They're not gaslighting you. It's not a biasy thing. It's like they're worried. They're upset. They wanted Ben Johnson out of the division. The Bears kept him in the division and are also making some moves with and around Ben Johnson that's attracting the ire of other NFC North fans around this. And when it comes to the coaching staff that Ben Johnson is putting together, I want to talk about that in a little bit here and some of the other things in this process that strike me as why this feels different. Not just about Ben Johnson as the candidate, but also how the Bears have gone about hiring Ben Johnson as their head coach.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement for the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. The AFC Championship, Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen. Allen got the best of this matchup during the regular season, but FanDuel has opened the line in favor of Mahomes. What else is new? The Chiefs 1.5-point edge over the Bills right now, which means our friends at FanDuel see this one as essentially a coin flip with the Chiefs getting home field advantage. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The Indianapolis Colts have their new defensive coordinator in Lou Anarumo.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast.
Lou Anarumo, the Colts' new defensive coordinator. He was with the Cincinnati Bengals from 2019 to 2024. Overall, and Jake, we'll get into this in a second. Overall, not a super successful stint with the Bengals. Like, there were some growing pains early on, and there were some rough patches in the later parts, which is why he's kind of available right now. But if we want to really push optimism on this signing, or on this hiring, for a better term there, 2021 Bengals and 2022 Bengals were the peak of his powers, I guess. The mad scientist, Lou Anarumo, that's where he was called the mad scientist, for what he was able to do in those 2 seasons with the Bengals. He was the architect behind that Bengals defense that essentially dragged, again, it feels weird to say this, but a bad Bengals offense in that postseason to the Super Bowl and nearly got them a Super Bowl championship. And then the next season in 2022, they had a very strong defense and went all the way to the AFC Championship game the next season as well. Lou Anarumo, again, for the imperfectness that started his tenure with the Bengals and for the end of his tenure, during that 2-season stretch, the Bengals are one of the best defenses in football.
Yeah, they really were. They had a complete unit that was clicking on all cylinders. And this is when I think of defenses who kind of had quick turnarounds, this is when I think of one that has used free agency really, really well to make modest signings come together to make a really cohesive full defense. And I know there's going to be parts of the Colts fan base where this isn't a very popular pick. When we've talked about Anarumo over the last couple of weeks, people have been like, yeah, but he cost the Bengals a playoff spot, this season, everything. There's layers to this, basically. Now, schematically and ability to adapt and move guys around and do creative things, Anarumo is beyond what Gus Bradley was doing. But it comes down to personnel. I mean, the Bengals lost several really important starting defenders over the last couple years. They lost Jesse Bates, one of the top free safeties in the NFL. Chidobe Awuzie, DJ Reader, Eli Apple, Von Bell left and came back. So a lot of this guy's most important pieces, communicators, leaders on that defense, they were shown the door. I mean, the offense had a ton of money funneled into it, but there is gray area as to why, statistically it didn't always look pretty. But this is a guy who holds guys accountable, which is one of the biggest things you want to see here. He's a leader. Again, you said the mad scientist moniker, that's from his players. That's the players always felt like this guy had an effective creative game plan for them going into each week. He had guys really bought into what his plans were. And you think of a lot of big games, like the Kansas City Chiefs. There's been games against, the Ravens and some AFC powerhouses. Not always against the Ravens, but
it's hard. Lamar Jackson's tough.
When you face each other twice a year, there's a lot that can happen. But yeah. I see Anarumo as a guy who is able to kind of get some misfits together and perform really well. And also his teams rose to the challenge in big moments a lot, I felt. So this is maybe not a hire where it's going to look pretty 24/7. But I think overall, this is going to be a really good move in the right direction for this defense. And you're going to see some guys maybe maximize their potential. Even, free agents, you don't have to get a bunch of high price guys, but the more modest signings, I think that might come in a little more, and they're going to get the most out of those guys, hopefully.
Yeah. And let me contextualize his tenure with the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to do so in a way that I think would make Bengals and Colts fans pretty happy with. I'm going to be fair to both sides here. So Lou Anarumo comes in 2019 with Zach Taylor. And the Bengals on defense were an older unit that just wasn't very good yet. You know, they had to refresh a lot of the group on that side of the ball in terms of free agent signings, in terms of draft picks. They hit on several draft picks, you know, linebacker Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Jesse Bates, Cam Taylor Britt. Like, those were guys they drafted who came in and did some good things. And they also had some good signings that were productive for them. Eli Apple, DJ Reader was a huge one. Chidobe Awuzie was a signing as well that came in. I think he came from the Cowboys.
Yep.
So when they had all of those things come together with the draft hits, along with big time signings in 2021, in 2022, it was a very good unit. They really started to figure out in the second half of 2021 how good of a unit they could be. And then you look at that playoff run to the Super Bowl. I think they had like 7 turnovers forced in the 3 games leading up to the Super Bowl. There was a game against the Tennessee Titans, who I think were the 1 seed that year, where the Bengals had like 6 sacks in that game too. It was a really, really strong playoff run, carried over to 2022, did some really good things. And then you started seeing the talent depart from the defense. Now, as a defensive coordinator, you need to adjust to that. There needs to be adjustment. And they did bring in younger players for him to supplant those veterans with. You know, Dax Hill, they just didn't really figure out a way to utilize him until the second half of this past season. So, you know, Lou Anarumo certainly deserves some fault for what happened with the Bengals this season. It's not only because talent departed, but I will say when he did start to stubbornly move off of some of the veterans that he had in place early this season, because again, your choice was a lot of these veteran players that have been productive for him or younger players who may not have been ready. It took some time to move to those younger players. And we did see in the second half of this season, the Bengals defense did start to creep back up towards the middle of the road in EPA per play with a lot of younger players. And again, without that top talent like the DJ Reader, Chidobe Awuzie, and the Jesse Bates of the world. So I think overall it was a pretty successful tenure with the Bengals. It certainly made sense why they wanted to move on, because most of this year was not great. But he was able to right the ship a little bit towards the end of the season when the Bengals were making their playoff stretch or their playoff push late in the year. So, you know, again, there was the peaks and valleys of his tenure with the Bengals. I wouldn't say it was like some superstar home run tenure, but it had some really, really great moments. And I think even when, you know, the struggles did start to happen late in 2023 and for the first half of 2024, he did find a way to right the ship. Now, it was a little too late, obviously, this season, but they did find a way to find some success late this season when the Bengals were pushing for the playoffs. So Lou Anarumo, in my opinion, and we're going to get into more of the film stuff here in a second, like the schematic stuff in segment 2, but in my opinion, a very good defensive coach. I wouldn't say he's like a top tier, like number 1 defensive coordinator in football, but like you said, Jake, he gets his units ready to play for big matchups. He does perform pretty well in the playoffs. And when he's had the personnel in the past, he's been able to put out some really strong defenses for the Bengals. So I think this is a really good hire. I feel much better about this hire than I did about the Gus Bradley hire a couple years ago. And honestly, Lou Anarumo, for my money, aside from Dennis Allen, was the best defensive coordinator on the market. I very, very much like this hire, and I think it's going to be very good for the Colts. I think this was a Shane Steichen-led hire. I think this is who Shane Steichen wanted. And you guys are going to get a more aggressive defensive coach who is more willing to adapt on defense. So everything the Colts fans have kind of wanted, aside from like a Wink Martindale, like 70% blitz rate, like they're not going to get that, but you're going to get a more adaptable defensive coach, which I think is much better than what we've had here with the static defenses of Gus Bradley and even Matt Eberflus before that.
Yeah, all I know is I got to see this defense up close and personal back in August when the Colts were in Cincinnati for the joint practice in the preseason. And the Bengals defense had the Colts offense's number. Let's just say that. There was a very viral moment of a lot of smack talk coming from the Bengals defense.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of the most fun evenings this year was me and my wife getting a chance to go out. The excitement, the energy, it's unforgettable. It's unmistakable. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Wisconsin already had plenty to say about Xavier Lucas transferring to Miami.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes.
For reference, because we're going to be responding to a lot of this stuff that Wisconsin put out there in their Saturday evening statement. Let me read the statement for you, and we'll break it down with Mr. Heitner. Wisconsin on Lucas transferring to Miami, despite them never putting him in the transfer portal. They say, "We are disappointed that Xavier Lucas has chosen to withdraw from the University of Wisconsin. He has been a valued member of our football program. We were looking forward to helping him continue to grow as a student, a person, and a football player." On December 2nd, 2024, Xavier and Wisconsin Athletics entered into a binding 2-year NIL agreement reflecting his strong commitment to continuing with the Wisconsin football program. We understand that he also executed a separate agreement with the Varsity Collective. His agreement with Wisconsin Athletics included substantial financial compensation for Xavier. Under the terms of the agreement between Xavier and Wisconsin Athletics, it remains in effect and enforceable, they say. They continue. Badger student athletes who have signed these agreements expect Wisconsin Athletics to honor the terms. In turn, Wisconsin Athletics relies on the student athlete representations in signing these agreements that they will do the same. A request to enter the transfer portal after entering into such an agreement is inconsistent with the representations and the mutual understanding of the agreement and explains, they say, the reason for not processing a transfer portal request under these circumstances. Under the transfer provision used by Xavier this past week, any contact between a student athlete enrolled at one institution and the football program to which they are transferring is prohibited per NCAA rules. We have credible information indicating impermissible contact between Xavier and University of Miami football program personnel prior to Xavier's request to enter the transfer portal. Direct interference with another institution's committed player and contractual interests is prohibited by NCAA tampering rules and the law. This is another significant moment, they say, in the evolution of college athletics as we move toward a future state that will rely on direct contracting with student athletes. Enforcing the parties' adherence to contract obligations and addressing improper interference by other institutions must be a priority. The system cannot work without an operational model that both establishes and enforces agreed upon rules and regulations and contractual terms that are binding on both institutions and student athletes. We continue to review facts as they unfold in this matter, and we will evaluate all options going forward to determine the appropriate course of action. Darren Heitner, who we've referenced a number of times the past few days here on Locked On Canes. He is an attorney representing Xavier Lucas. And in all of this, we refer to it as a saga. It's been going on for over a month. We appreciate everything Darren is doing for Lucas and all the insight. And the truth teller, Bruce Warner, keeps coming out of retirement. He's back. I know he's got some legal questions. Bruce is an attorney, by the way, but let's start out here with Darren. So, Darren, we read the statement from Wisconsin for all the people out there, and I'm sure you're very anxious to give Xavier's side and your side on this, since Wisconsin clearly gave their side of it. Let's start with what the Badgers what they repeatedly referred to as a binding 2-year contract that was signed by Xavier Lucas. How can a revenue sharing contract, how can that be binding even though the House settlement can't pass for about another 2.5-3 months?
Excellent question, Alex. First of all, thanks so much for having me. And I've been following your coverage. It's been excellent. It's probably been pretty difficult to follow because everything's moving so quickly. Mm-hmm. To your question specifically about the memorandum of understanding, which purports to be 2 years in length, and how it can be reconciled with this House settlement that is preliminarily approved by Judge Claudia Wilkin, a federal judge, but it will not be finally approved until the earliest April 7, 2025. That is the date on which she has decided to host a hearing. And at that hearing, she can provide final approval. She can rule from the bench and do so. She can also take it under advisement and decide to rule at a later date. Or she can say, I have a lot of concerns with this settlement agreement. I am not going to provide final approval. We go back some months when there was a hearing for preliminary approval. She actually expressed a lot of concerns about how the settlement agreement was worded. Ultimately, the parties, that being the counsel for the plaintiffs as well as counsel for the NCAA, went back to the drawing board, made some minor adjustments, and Judge Wilkin decided to ultimately provide that preliminary approval. A lot of people, including schools, conferences, and the NCAA, appear to be operating as though it's a shoo-in that Judge Wilkin will provide final approval and that she will do so on or around April 7, 2025. From my perspective, it's not a guarantee. But I think what's of penultimate importance is that when we look at these contracts that are being signed, and if we look at Wisconsin and some other Big Ten schools that have decided to essentially adopt this Big Ten template, and by the way, that is the reason why the Big Ten issued a statement in support of Wisconsin, because it is the architect of the agreement that Wisconsin and some other Big Ten schools, not all Big Ten schools, are using. It is premised on this final approval of the settlement. But as we sit here right now having this conversation, the NCAA rules are what the NCAA rules are, which is that there cannot be pay for play. Schools cannot make direct payments to players. The state of Wisconsin, unlike a couple of other states, has not modified its laws either through legislative work or an executive order to allow for direct payments from schools to players. And Wisconsin didn't pay Xavier Lucas. So the fact of the matter is, as drafted, at least from my perspective, the contract's not valid and binding because it relies on certain premises that have not yet occurred. And by the way, there's no damage to Wisconsin because it hasn't actually paid out any money to Xavier Lucas at this point in time and never will. Mm-hmm. So to me, this is not a battle that Wisconsin wants to take. It's hard for me to speculate as to what it will do. I was surprised by the fact that it issued a public statement. I think a lot of people were surprised by it. Less surprised that the Big Ten decided to follow Wisconsin's statement and provide support. That was not at all surprising to me.
You know, Darren, you said something about an agreement or the contract. It seems like it was drafted by Wisconsin and the Big Ten with no input from anybody else. I'm concerned about that. I mean, how do you have an agreement with two parties don't agree to the language in the document? So these guys are being forced to sign these things, it seems like.
Bruce, in our profession, we oftentimes refer to that as a contract of adhesion. And if the terms are so one-sided, and one of the parties, the athlete, who may not have had representation review the contract, didn't have a real appreciation for what he was signing, and really all the rights are provided to the other side, mm-hmm. From my perspective, it's also an illusory contract.
Correct. That's what I meant.
And could be unconscionable. So
absolutely,
that goes beyond the myriad of points that I know,
Darren.
But, you know, because it is deep into the law, and you know, on X it's a bit tough to go that deep and have a real appreciation, and then I'm just going to get thousands of responses from these angry Wisconsin fans, and by the way, they're hitting up my Instagram and sending me DMs, and unfortunately
they love me too, don't worry.
Religion, yeah, it is what it is. But yes, Bruce, you're preaching to the choir there, and I think it's just one more reason why it would be so short-sighted for Wisconsin and the Big Ten to escalate this, because if you put it in front of a judge who appreciates the law, this is the type of contract that can get struck down. And, you know, I didn't negotiate this contract for Xavier Lucas, but I have negotiated this MOU on behalf of other players at other Big Ten schools. There's not a single one that we just executed upon delivery. There was a lot of blood on that paper, which means a lot of redlining, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a big risk because if we go to court on the validity of the contract and a judge deems it to be invalid and not enforceable, what does that mean for all the other contracts that have been executed thus far?
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. And the FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement for the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. The AFC Championship, Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen. Allen got the best of this matchup during the regular season, but FanDuel has opened the line in favor of Mahomes. What else is new? The Chiefs, 1.5 point edge over the Bills right now, which means our friends at FanDuel see this one as essentially a coin flip with the Chiefs getting home field advantage. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The largest comeback in team history.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast.
What a win. What a wild comeback for the Pelicans. 123-119. Take a bow, CJ McCollum. He was awesome in this game. There's no getting around it. CJ McCollum was freaking awesome. You might not like him. Don't matter right now. He was fantastic in this game. 45 points on 18 of 31 shooting. I want you to think about this. 45 points on 31 shot attempts is insanely, insanely good. Only got to the line 4 times. Normally, when you have that kind of efficiency, it's really boosted up by really good free throw numbers. 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks for CJ McCollum in this one, just 2 turnovers. He was awesome. On a night where the starters looked real bad, getting down 25 in this game, CJ was the lone guy that brought it on a night when the Pelicans looked like they were lifeless. They were listless. We'll talk about that in the third segment of WTF happened for the Pelicans to get down by 25 to an actively tanking Utah Jazz team in the first place. But CJ was on a heater, and he's been on a heater recently. 45 points tonight. Don't forget, he had a 50-point game earlier in the year. Earlier this month. He has been leading this team consistently since the Pelicans have started getting better. We talk about the Zion effect, and I think that's a very real thing. We talked about it, the Everydayers know, in yesterday's show. But CJ McCollum is not someone that we should forget about here because he has been flat out awesome for the Pelicans. And there's a reason now that they're 7-3 in their last 10 games. He's been playing. Zion didn't play in this one, out with a non-COVID illness. That type of performance is kind of eye-opening for a number of reasons, and thus it creates the first problem for New Orleans. They're 7-3 in their last 10. We don't want that. Honestly, as much as I like winning and I want him to win, and I want him to get a couple of wins here and there, we went over it in Friday's show or last week's show for the Everydayers. They're not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but they may as well be. At this point, they need to go 29-9 the rest of the way just to get 500 and have a chance at the 10th seed, and that might not even get you there. But by winning these games 4 in a row now, they're hurting their draft stock, their draft positioning. That's not great. In my opinion, this is a 4-player draft. Well, they got the 4th worst record right now, so they're still kind of in there, but this is one of those things where, you know, if it goes horribly wrong in the lottery, you could drop to 8. That's not a great position to be in. When they were down 25 points to the Utah Jazz, a Utah Jazz team that's going to actively try and lose, and is a team you're kind of competing with for one of those top draft picks, maybe let them win. I don't know. Maybe let them win. You know, if you can't make the playoffs going forward, finishing just outside that, and giving you the worst lottery odds versus better lottery odds is a little bit detrimental to the future of this franchise. At this point, you need to be prioritizing next season, not just having the best record you can this season. We'll talk more about this with Ingram. We'll talk more about this with Willie Green in the future too, but they need to start prioritizing that, and you're starting to see some organizational misalignment here. Ownership wants one thing, David Griffin wants one thing, Willie Green wants another thing, and they're not in line here. There's kinks in that chain of command and all of that, and it's not a great position to be in. CJ is so good that he can get you wins single-handedly like he did in this game. Look, the 3-point shooting was awesome. You saw his crafty veteran moves of driving to the basket, finishing with those layups, getting the floaters that he needs. And look, the best play, well, not the best play, but one of the best plays was late in the game where in overtime where he just kicked it. I think I just got the alert that it's like literally snowing in New Orleans when I recorded that. So if you saw me look at my phone, I think it was that. It was when late in the game on almost the game winner, Pels up 1, he drives and attacks the basket. It's taken away and he kicks the ball to a wide open Trey Murphy who drains a corner 3, and that was the dagger and all she wrote. His play to just look up, find Trey, get him an assist there, and win the game was truly impressive. He was just flat out awesome in this game and brought energy on a night that the Pelicans just did not have it whatsoever until far too late. And they're lucky they were playing the Utah Jazz because otherwise you don't win this game. So you don't need wins, and CJ is going to help you get these wins. Honestly, it's a bit of a problem, in my opinion. We'll talk more about the organizational misalignment, in my opinion, in the future. But it's a massive comeback. Look, it was fun. It was fun. Winning games is fun. And again, it shows you a glimpse against a tanking Utah Jazz team. Take that for what it's worth. But those guys aren't tanking. The players on the court aren't tanking. Isaiah Collier isn't tanking. Keontae George isn't tanking. Walker Kessler sure as heck wasn't tanking. None of those guys are tanking. The organization might be by not playing certain guys, but the players aren't. That's worth keeping in mind when it comes to this. Players never care about that sort of thing. They don't want a high draft pick for the Utah Jazz because they don't want someone to get drafted and then replace them. That's not a great position to be in here. So CJ went out and brought it against a team on a night that nobody else did, and he's been doing this consistently. He's been really, really good. And the first problem is, he's going to probably help this team win too many games, and maybe you don't end up with a top 4 pick. Maybe you finish with the 8th overall pick, whether it's dropping down in the lottery or just kind of being there anyway. Is that ideal? Is that good? I'm posing that it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but I'm posing it to you. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you want them winning games? Do you not? If you say they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, then what do you want them to do? They're not going 29-9 the rest of the way just to get to 500, and even then you might miss the playoffs. Losing games seems to be in their best interest, and prioritizing the draft seems to be in their best interest. CJ McCollum's going to help them win games. Is that a problem? Is it not? You tell me in the comments down below.